They say people never forget how you made them feel. That night at the plaza, I finally understood why. It was our 10th anniversary, and the ballroom glowed with golden chandeliers and mirrored walls that reflected the perfection I had spent a decade curating. The name cards were embossed with gold leaf. The champagne was Dom Perignon. The string quartet played Clair de Lune. I wore the same perfume I did on our wedding day. And Daniel wore the same smug smile he always did when all eyes were on him. 80 guests, all from the city's highest circles, turned their chairs as my husband, my perfect husband, raised his glass and tapped it gently. To love, to family, to 10 incredible years, someone whispered expectantly at the next table. Daniel cleared his throat. Thank you for coming tonight, he began, voice smooth, rehearsed. A decade of marriage is a lifetime of memories, and I think it's time I was honest. His voice dipped. People leaned in, mistaking drama for sentiment. He looked at me and smirked. Victoria, you've disgusted me since our wedding night. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand. There was a gasp. My mother covered her mouth. Someone laughed nervously. Daniel stood tall, reveling in the horror. 10 years I've tolerated this cold, insipid facade, played the role of a loving husband. But tonight, I'm done pretending. He didn't even finish the thought, because I stood up, smoothed the folds of my champagne-colored dress, and turned calmly to the AV technician near the stage. I gave him the nod we had practiced. The lights dimmed. The projector screen behind the band flared to life. The strings stopped mid-phrase, their final note hanging in the air like smoke. What the hell is this? Daniel muttered. His glass trembled slightly in his hand. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The screen flickered, then cut to black, and in gold serif letters it read, 10 years of happiness. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A soft melody began, our first dance song. The opening frame showed me in my wedding dress, twirling in slow motion, smiling at a man I thought I loved. And Daniel, staring back, his expression unreadable. The room hushed. I could feel the tension folding in on itself. There were whispers behind me. Is this their wedding video? Is this part of the program? My hands were still at my sides, my jaw steady. I stared at the screen like it wasn't my life playing out in front of 100 frozen stares. Daniel's face turned pale. Victoria, what is this? He asked again, louder this time. I didn't look at him. Instead, I let the next chapter of our carefully constructed lie play out for all to see. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that this wasn't just a montage, it was an indictment. And we were just getting started. 3 days before the anniversary, I came home early with a migraine. That morning had started like any other. Coffee in the Langford kitchen. Chloe heading off to school. Daniel halfway through some business call with his assistant. I told him I wasn't feeling well, and he barely looked up. Go rest, he mumbled, scrolling through his phone. I returned around noon. The penthouse was unusually quiet, like it was holding its breath. I headed straight to the bedroom, kicked off my heels, and was just about to crawl into bed when I noticed it. Daniel's phone, sitting on the nightstand. Unlocked. Alone. And utterly unlike him. Daniel never left his phone unattended. He carried it like it was fused to his body. I stared at it for a few seconds too long. Then I picked it up. The screen lit up instantly. A new message, preview, blinked across the top. Can't wait to try on the new set. You said red was your favorite. The sender's name read, Kitten. My throat closed. I hesitated, and then, with hands that had steadied 1,000 charity galas and boardroom speeches, I unlocked it. Chloe's birthday. Daniel never bothered to change his passcode. The text thread opened into a minefield of betrayal. Photos, messages, voice notes, all of them from Ashley Monroe, his 28-year-old executive assistant. I hate pretending you're just my boss, she wrote. I hate seeing you go home to her. Just 3 more days, Daniel replied in one message. Let her have her anniversary. The second it's over, I'm done playing house. Another message followed. Don't worry about the prenup. My attorney says if I wait until after the anniversary, I can walk away with half. Half. My name. My home. My child's future. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone clutched in my hand like it was burning through my skin. The photographs. Daniel and Ashley at the Four Seasons. In his office after hours. One of them in what I recognized as my robe. I didn't cry, not then. I just felt something inside me shift, like a door slamming shut in a house I didn't realize was haunted. The next morning, I met someone for coffee. Not a friend, not a lawyer, a man named Miles Grayson, a former federal investigator turned private detective. We'd met once before, years ago, when he helped my father expose a corporate embezzlement ring. I told him everything, quietly, methodically, like I was reciting someone else's life. He listened without interruption, only nodding now and then. So, what do you want exactly? He asked finally, pen poised over his notepad. I looked him in the eye and said, I want proof. I want timelines. I want photos, locations, conversations, everything. He leaned back, tapping his pen against the table. That'll cost you, he said. Money's not a problem, I replied. This isn't just about divorce. This is about exposure. I want the world to see what he really is. Miles raised an eyebrow. And what's your end goal, Victoria? I stirred my coffee once, twice, and smiled for the first time in 2 days. A celebration he'll never forget. It only took Miles 3 days. 3 days to pull apart the illusion I had spent a decade believing in. He sent the files over in a sleek leather binder. No digital copies, no emails. He knew what he was doing. I opened it in my study, the soft jazz playing in the background suddenly too cheerful, too fake. The first page was a photo. Daniel, 10 years younger, standing outside a failing tech startup in Brooklyn. Beside him, a foreclosure notice taped to the door. That was 3 months before our wedding. The next page showed a timeline. His business collapsed in the spring of that year. 2 weeks later, he started dating me. I flipped to the next section. Phone records, bank statements, social media screenshots. Daniel hadn't just fallen in love with me, he had targeted me. My family name, Langford, opened doors in Manhattan most people didn't even know existed. We didn't just attend the Met Gala, we funded part of it. And Daniel knew that. He didn't pursue me for love. He pursued me for legacy. He introduced himself at a gallery opening my father sponsored, pretending it was a coincidence. He researched my interests, mimicked my values, inserted himself into every space I occupied. Every move was calculated. By the time he proposed, the Langford board was already considering him for a junior position. He played the long game, and I had been the grand prize. One page in the file showed a note Daniel had written to his former college roommate. Marrying Victoria isn't just a win, it's security. Once her father steps down, I'll be in a position to steer the company. She's too soft to notice. I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. She's too soft to notice. He'd been wrong about a lot of things, but that was his biggest mistake. I closed the binder slowly, my hands cold. It wasn't just betrayal. It was invasion. He had studied me like a blueprint, designed a role, played it flawlessly, but now the script was mine to write. I called Miles back the same evening. I need a favor, I said. I want you to help me film something. He hesitated. What kind of something? I looked out the window, where the city pulsed beneath me like a sleeping beast. A wedding video, I said. Only this time it won't be a lie. The next week, I told Daniel I had an idea. Let's make a video for Chloe, I said sweetly, brushing my fingers across his sleeve at dinner. For our 10-year anniversary. Something she can watch when she's older. He raised an eyebrow. A documentary? Something like that, I said. Us talking about love, about family, about how we made it this far. He grinned, arrogant as ever. finally embracing the public image? Exactly, I whispered. Exactly. He never noticed the camera angles were too professional. He never questioned the sound guy's background in courtroom surveillance. And he definitely never noticed that Chloe wasn't home anymore. I had already moved her to my mother's estate in Connecticut, far from the storm I was about to unleash. The morning of the anniversary, I stood in front of the mirror in my dressing room at the plaza and practiced my smile. Not the soft one I used at charity luncheons. Not the proud one I reserved for Chloe's school plays. This was different. This was the smile of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for being too patient, too trusting, too blind. The smile of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. I touched up my lipstick and smoothed my gown. The stylist hovered nearby, fussing over the hem. "You look radiant," she said. I nodded, not really hearing her. Somewhere beneath us, the ballroom was being prepared. Gold-trimmed name cards, lavender and white peonies, the Langford crest carved into an ice sculpture. Everything Daniel ever wanted. Everything he believed was still his. When I stepped into the hall, Daniel was already there, sipping champagne with Ashley. Of course he brought her. I had insisted. "She's part of your team," I had said innocently. "It's only fair." Ashley wore a red satin dress, too tight for the occasion. She clung to his arm like a trophy. They looked rehearsed, like they had practiced their betrayal. I didn't flinch. I greeted them like a hostess should. "You made it," I said warmly. Ashley blinked. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You look different," he said slowly. "Lighter," I replied. "It must be the lighting." We made our way to the head table. My parents sat nearby, my mother giving me a searching look. She had noticed the shift. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to stay quiet. Chloe wasn't there, of course. I had told everyone she was spending the night at her grandparents'. I didn't want her to see what was coming. Not yet. The pianist began to play, and Daniel stood up for his toast, the same one he always delivered, just polished for the occasion. Except this time he couldn't finish it, because the lights dimmed, the projector flared to life, and the video began. Not the sweet montage he expected, but the first crack in the porcelain mask he wore. The guests turned in their chairs. Daniel froze mid-sentence. On screen, he appeared 10 years younger, sitting in a cheap suit, laughing into the camera. "Of course I married her," he said. "You think I'd pass up a Langford?" Laughter. Clinking glasses. A younger Daniel continued. "Her dad's practically a god in Manhattan. She's sweet, naive, the kind of woman who says yes before she asks what she's signing." The room fell silent. Someone gasped. Someone else dropped a fork. Daniel's face twisted. "Victoria, turn it off," he growled. But I stayed seated, eyes on the screen. "This is your moment, darling," I said softly. "Enjoy it." The clip ended. A new one began, this time the hotel surveillance footage. Daniel and Ashley. Their laughter in the hallway. A stolen kiss in the elevator. The timestamp? Last Tuesday, hours after he told me he was in D.C. for meetings. His lies weren't just exposed, they were immortalized. He reached for the remote. It wasn't there. Because I had it. Because I controlled everything now. The video cut to black. For a moment, the ballroom was frozen in that strange, echoing silence where shame has nowhere to hide. Then the screen lit up again, this time with a softer tone. A bedroom, dim evening light, and Chloe sitting cross-legged on her bed, holding a stuffed fox in her lap. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" she asked the camera. My voice off-screen gently responded, "He's working late tonight, sweetie." Chloe frowned. "He's always working late. Does he not like being here?" There was no script, no edits, just truth, captured in a moment I had once tried to forget. Gasps rippled through the room. I saw my mother turn away, one hand to her heart. Daniel stared in horror, trapped in his own unraveling. And then the sound of Chloe crying, soft at first, then breaking into a trembling sob as she whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" The video paused on that frame. Her tear-streaked face. The room was silent except for someone sniffling near the back. Maybe it was Ashley. Maybe it was me. I couldn't tell anymore. Daniel pushed his chair back, chest heaving. "This is disgusting," he barked. "You're using our daughter." "Don't," I said, standing now, voice calm but cutting. "Don't you dare say her name like she's just a prop in your story. She's the only reason I waited this long." He tried to speak, but I raised my hand and the final clip began playing. It was Daniel again, this time in an upscale office, whispering into a phone. "No, she won't see it coming," he said. "Once the paperwork is filed, I'll freeze the accounts. She's too busy playing mommy to notice." I didn't need to narrate anymore. The video was telling the story for me. I walked slowly to the center of the ballroom, stopping just beside him. "You said you married me for legacy," I said. "But what you never understood was that my legacy doesn't come from a name. It comes from knowing when to walk away and when to fight." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single envelope. Sleek, heavy. I handed it to him without flinching. "These are divorce papers. My lawyers have already secured everything in my name. Your access is gone. The apartment? Mine. The accounts? Frozen. The firm? They've seen the footage." Daniel looked down at the envelope like it might bite him. "You can't do this," he said, voice barely audible. "You need me." I leaned in just close enough for only him to hear. "You were right about one thing," I whispered. "I was too soft. But softness isn't weakness. It's restraint. And tonight, I've stopped holding back." He sank into his chair, deflated, eyes darting across the room. No one looked at him, not even Ashley, especially not Ashley, who was quietly backing toward the exit, her face white as the table linens. I returned to my seat, lifted my glass. "To truth," I said simply, and drank. I thought the worst had passed, that exposing Daniel in front of our friends, our families, and the board members who once begged him to speak at their summits would be the final crescendo of the symphony of revenge. But I was wrong. The room hadn't fully processed what had just happened when someone stood up. A man I hadn't seen in years. Henry Ashcroft, the chairman of Langford Industries. My father's old friend. Daniel's former mentor. His presence alone turned heads. He'd flown in from Geneva that morning, quiet and unannounced. But it was what he held in his hand that made me freeze. A small leather folio. Langford blue. Gold seal. He cleared his throat. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," he began, voice steady but sharp. "But seeing that we've all just watched the truth unfold, perhaps it's time we finish what Victoria started." Daniel stiffened. Henry looked right at him. "You didn't just lie to your wife, Daniel. You lied to us, to the company. You signed conflict of interest disclosures, swore up and down that your relationship with Ashley Monroe was professional." He opened the folio. We found a paper trail. Her promotion, her bonus structure, the last-minute transfer of restricted shares. Daniel stood. "You can't accuse me of—" "Sit," Henry snapped, his voice carrying through the room like a gavel. "You're not just being accused. You're being removed." There was a murmur of voices, nervous, shocked. Henry turned to me. "Victoria, your father always said you were the only Langford with both heart and spine. It's time we let you prove it." He placed the folio in front of me. "These are executive control documents. Your name is on them now." My hands didn't tremble. Not this time. I opened the folder and signed. A single, fluid signature. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. Daniel was still frozen beside his seat. I looked at him and said, "Only, we're done here." But the night wasn't finished with him, because just as the guests began to stir, preparing to leave the wreckage behind, a uniformed officer stepped through the side entrance. Another followed, then two more. The guests parted like water. Daniel Langford, One officer said, "We need you to come with us." Daniel laughed, sharp, bitter. For what? A bad marriage. The officer didn't flinch. Fraud, insider trading, misuse of company funds. A second later, they cuffed him right there, in front of everyone he had once manipulated, charmed, and fooled. Ashley gasped. Wait, what? No, this isn't. But no one was listening. Not to her. Not to him. The ballroom emptied slowly, some people whispering, others just walking out in silence. The string quartet never resumed. The ice sculpture began to melt. The celebration had ended, but something else had begun. I stood quietly at the center of it all, feeling the weight of every step that had brought me here. And then I turned and walked away. In the days that followed, the silence I expected never came. Weeks passed, but the storm only evolved. I thought the next morning would feel like silence, like a calm after the storm. But instead, it was louder than the gala had ever been. My phone buzzed nonstop. News alerts, missed calls, board members, reporters, even distant cousins who'd never invited me to their weddings. Every headline screamed the same thing in different fonts. Langford heir exposes husband in public meltdown. Insider scandal at Langford Industries. Betrayal in the ballroom. By noon, I had a migraine that no pill could touch. I stood at the kitchen counter of my parents' townhouse in Connecticut, stirring tea I wouldn't drink, while Chloe played upstairs with my mother. She didn't know the full story yet, just that Mommy and Daddy were going to be living in different houses, and that she'd be staying with Grandma for a while. When she asked why, I'd simply said, "Because I want you to be somewhere peaceful." She nodded, then asked if her stuffed fox could come too. That was the part that broke me. Not the headlines, not the photos, not even the footage replaying on morning television. It was her innocence still intact. Around 3, I finally turned on the TV. There it was, Daniel's arrest. Again and again. Spliced between clips of me toasting to truth and that grainy hotel surveillance footage of him and Ashley. His lawyer had released a statement, some feeble defense about doctored videos and personal vendettas. It didn't matter. The footage was too real. The damage was too deep. The court of public opinion had already made its ruling. I wasn't sure if I felt satisfaction or something colder. Something like release. A knock on the front door startled me. I opened it to find Miles Grayson, in his usual dark coat, holding a plain manila envelope. "Told you I deliver," he said. I smiled, stepped aside, and let him in. He placed the envelope on the coffee table. "Final report," he said. "Financial breakdowns, travel logs, some offshore accounts that aren't exactly legal." I sat across from him, arms folded. "Will that help the SEC?" "They've already opened a case file," he said. "You might get your day in court. Or 10. I looked out the window, where the trees had begun to shed their gold and crimson leaves. Autumn had always been my father's favorite season. "You ever get tired of seeing people unravel?" I asked. Miles chuckled softly. "Not really, but I do like seeing someone hold the thread for once." He stood ready to leave. "One more thing," he added. "I found something odd. You should look through the reports. Last section. Page 42. Then he was gone. No explanation. Just that cryptic note. I waited until Chloe was asleep. Waited until the house was quiet. Then I opened the envelope. Flipped past the names, the numbers, the photos, until I found it, page 42. And that's when I saw it, a scanned copy of a letter, dated 2 years before our wedding, written by Daniel, addressed to someone named Lillian Carter. The subject line, premarital agreement strategy. My blood ran cold. I stared at the letter long after the words stopped making sense. Lillian Carter. The name wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it was painfully familiar. She'd been part of my world once, distant but always present. She worked in my father's legal division, a sharp, poised woman who never stayed long at company events, but always seemed to know everything before anyone else. She had a quiet power about her, the kind that could hide knives behind smiles. When Daniel and I were newly engaged, she handled our prenup. I barely paid attention back then, too busy choosing flowers, table linens, and imagining a perfect life. But the letter Miles had found wasn't professional. It was personal, intimate. It opened with "Dearest Lily" and closed with "Yours, always D." In it, Daniel laid out a plan, cold, clinical, strategic. He detailed how marrying into the Langford name would secure access to internal investments, how he would keep Victoria satisfied long enough to gain power of signature. He even referenced our future child. One heir will seal the bond. After that, we'll see. I dropped the paper. My hands were shaking. I hadn't just been betrayed by a husband. I'd been used by an entire arrangement. Lillian had helped him. She'd sat across from me in boardrooms, shook my hand with polished nails, and looked me in the eye while plotting to make me a pawn. For a brief moment, I couldn't breathe. My whole marriage, my whole motherhood, had been built on a foundation they engineered. The next morning, I met Miles again, this time in a cafe on the Upper East Side, away from cameras and whispers. I slid the letter across the table. "What do you know about her?" He didn't even blink. Lillian Carter, former corporate counsel, left Langford 6 months after your wedding. Currently on the board of a hedge fund run by guess who? "Ashley Monroe," I said through clenched teeth. "Bingo," he replied. Turns out Daniel was never working alone. Ashley was the bait. Lillian was the architect. I felt nauseous. "Do you think my father knew?" Miles looked at me for a long beat, then shook his head. "Your father was many things, but blind to betrayal? Never. My guess? He suspected. That's why he locked down the voting shares before he passed. Why he never fully gave Daniel control." I leaned back in my chair, the noise of the cafe fading beneath the weight of that realization. My father had tried to protect me, but he couldn't stop the storm, only prepare me to face it. I pulled out my phone and opened the Langford board contact list. Lillian's name was still there. I hovered my thumb over her number, then paused. No, not yet. There was one more thing I needed first. I turned to Miles. "Can you find out where she is tonight?" He nodded slowly. "You want a confrontation?" "No," I said. "I want an audience. Somewhere public. Somewhere she won't be able to run." My voice didn't waver this time. She helped design the lie. It's only fair she hears the truth from me. It took less than 48 hours for the perfect opportunity to find me. The Women's Executive Alliance was hosting its autumn gala, a black tie affair where the city's most powerful female figures gathered under the chandeliered ceilings of the Astoria Conservatory. I had always declined the invitation in the past, content to let others take the spotlight while I supported from the shadows. But this year was different. This year I had a reason to shine. I made sure Lillian Carter's name was on the guest list. And not just as a guest. She was listed as a keynote speaker on ethical leadership in corporate law. The irony nearly made me laugh. Miles helped secure me a speaking slot. It wasn't hard. The media frenzy around the Langford scandal had made me something of a symbol. They called me the Phoenix wife in one article, the heiress who fought back in another. I didn't care about the headlines. I cared that Lillian would be there, and that she wouldn't see it coming. The night of the gala, I wore navy silk. Understated, elegant, armored. I arrived late, deliberately, just as the main course was being cleared. Conversations quieted when I walked in. Faces turned. Some nodded with sympathy, others with curiosity. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at the corner table near the stage. Lillian sat alone, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. She hadn't aged. Still pristine. Still cold. The event chair greeted me warmly, motioned for me to take my place on stage. I walked slowly, confidently, each heel click against the marble floor, a quiet declaration. Lillian finally looked up. Our eyes met. Just for a second. Just long enough. She blinked, straightened her spine, but I had already won. I took the podium. "Good evening," I began, voice steady. "When I was first asked to speak tonight, I wasn't sure I belonged here. After all, for years I let other people shape my narrative, my career, my marriage, my silence. But recent events have taught me something. That being a woman in power doesn't just mean holding a title. It means holding your ground, especially when the ground beneath you is designed to collapse." Lillian's fork paused midair. The room held its breath. I was married to a man who promised forever, while planning my undoing before we even exchanged vows. He didn't act alone. He had help. Legal help. Trusted help. My voice sharpened. But you see, the thing about trust is it's louder when it breaks. And in my case, it broke so loudly the entire city heard. There was a murmur of understanding, a shifting of weight. Lillian's face was pale now. She reached for her glass with a hand that trembled slightly. I looked straight at her. To those who sit beside us and plan our downfall, to those who write our names in contracts while erasing our dignity, we see you now. And seeing is the first step to justice. I closed the speech with a soft thank you. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was sharp, controlled, precise, like a verdict. I didn't linger after the speech. I didn't need to. The silence on Lillian's face spoke volumes. The gala went on around her, but she never approached me, never said a word, just sat there, brittle behind a glass of untouched wine. I left the conservatory without looking back, stepped into the cool night air, and finally exhaled. The next morning, I received a call from James, my father's former attorney. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his voice unusually tight. "Something your father left behind." My stomach clenched. Left behind where? In the vault, the one under his old office at Langford. I hadn't been there since the funeral, not since the board swept in and Daniel pretended to mourn while quietly lobbying for control. But now I had the keys, and I wasn't just walking into that office as a daughter, I was walking in as the CEO. The vault was colder than I remembered. Steel walls, dust-covered shelves. James led me to a safety deposit drawer labeled only with a single initial, V. Inside was a small leather box, and within it an envelope, sealed, dated 6 months before my wedding. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's. "Victoria, if you're reading this," then something I feared has come to pass. I suspected Daniel wasn't who he claimed to be. I didn't know how deep the manipulation went, but I saw enough. Enough to take precautions. Enough to prepare you. You'll find attached 2 things. 1, the full breakdown of the prenuptial agreement I rewrote, one you never signed, but he did. It voids his claims to your inheritance. And 2, the name of the person who helped me uncover his plans. I paused, heart pounding. Inside the envelope was a document, folded with surgical precision. The prenup, ironclad, clear as day, and stapled to the back, a business card. Miles Grayson, Private Investigations. I laughed, out loud, alone in that vault. "You old fox," I whispered. "You knew." It hadn't been coincidence that Miles found his way to me. My father had sent him, years ago, had left behind a trail of protection disguised as distance. I blinked back tears. All this time, I thought I'd been walking into the fire alone. But my father had already laid the escape route in stone. As I drove home, I thought of Chloe, of the woman I was becoming for her, of the legacy I wanted her to inherit, not money, not property, but the unshakable belief that dignity was worth fighting for, and that silence wasn't the same as strength. It was time to close the circle. I sat down at my desk that evening and began to write. Not a legal document, not a press statement, a letter, one my daughter would read someday, one that would begin simply, "Chloe, here's what your father did, and here's how we rose from it." The weeks that followed were anything but peaceful. The media storm didn't calm, it evolved. Daniel's face was everywhere, now framed in courtroom sketches and news tickers that read, "Former CFO indicted." Ashley vanished from the public eye. Rumors swirled of her resignation, of a plea deal, of panic. Lillian quietly stepped down from every board she held a seat on, citing personal reasons. I never heard from her again. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require confrontation, just exposure. But closure, true closure, isn't the absence of noise. It's what you hear when the noise fades. Eventually, I found us a new place downtown, a quiet apartment with wide windows and no ghosts. For me, it was the sound of Chloe's laughter echoing through our new apartment. It was the silence between emails from the board. Not tension, but trust. It was the first time I stood in the Langford executive office, looked out the windows my father once did, and didn't feel like an imposter. One rainy afternoon, Miles dropped by unannounced, holding a white envelope. "Last piece of the puzzle," he said. "It's from a source inside the DA's office. They wanted you to have it." Inside was a copy of Daniel's plea statement, not for public release. Just one line stood out. I thought I could outsmart her. I never thought she'd fight back. I folded it, slid it into the back of my journal. That's all it was now. A footnote in the story of a man who underestimated the wrong woman. There would be court hearings, depositions, years of cleanup, but emotionally, spiritually, I was already done. I spent a Saturday morning helping Chloe paint a mural on the wall of her bedroom. Foxes and forests and stars. She asked if she could invite Grandma to see it. Of course, I said. My mother had grown quieter lately, less critical, more present. Maybe she saw now what she hadn't seen then. Or maybe losing the illusion of Daniel had finally opened her eyes. Either way, the past didn't hold as much weight as it once did. A few days later, I returned to the conservatory, not for revenge, not for spectacle, but for a small charity dinner. One of the organizers leaned in and whispered, "They're still talking about that speech you gave, the one where you didn't name names, but everyone felt it anyway." I smiled politely. "That wasn't a speech," I said. "That was a beginning." And it was the beginning of a life not defined by betrayal, but by reclamation. Of a woman not broken by deception, but sharpened by it. Of a daughter who finally understood the depth of her father's love. And a mother who would teach her own child what legacy truly meant. As I walked home that night under a quiet sky, the city lights reflecting in puddles at my feet, I realized something. Justice isn't always loud. But healing? Healing is thunderous. It ripples through generations. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply this. You get to live free, while they drown in the ruins they built for you. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't define you. Your response to it does. I used to think strength meant staying silent, enduring, not making waves. But now I know real strength is speaking up, walking away, and rebuilding on your own terms. Sometimes the people closest to us will weaponize our kindness. They'll test the limits of our love, confuse loyalty with submission, and assume we'll always choose peace over truth. But we don't owe anyone our silence, especially not those who tried to erase us. To anyone listening who's been lied to, underestimated, or made to feel small, you're not alone. You are not weak for believing the best in people, but you are powerful for choosing yourself when they stop deserving your trust. Revenge doesn't always come with shouting or spectacle. Sometimes it looks like peace, like dignity, like success that no one can steal, and the quiet confidence of knowing you survived and came out stronger. Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you'd never be and doing it without them.